also another neoliberal idea, open borders, which we forget was actually pioneered on the right. Well, again, this is something that you'd have to be our age to remember. But the Wall Street Journal was an open borders journal for a long time. The notion that the market trumped any other, to coin a term, any other consideration, which of course meant dramatic and sort of really almost unprecedented shifts in demographics in the West. Big jump in the proportion of foreign born in America, with all that you can see in history, the consequences of that. It takes time to assimilate, to absorb, to adjust, to come to some common understanding of what it means to be a citizen. Yet these neoliberals as well, and I think I'm putting the blame on them as much as the left, just said, well, screw it. Let them all in. Let's, and it's good for the business and it's good for the economy. And anyone who is, and this is the key move from both the right and the left, anyone who is concerned about this is a racist. Right. So you immediately cut off the possibility of a debate about it, which I think kind of suppresses the issue, which then sits there suppressed forever until somebody comes along and decides, well, I'm going to raise this issue. And that's what Trump did. And that revolutionized American politics. But I think people concern themselves with Trump, don't realize that Trump was made possible by the elites doing nothing and dismissing all of this for a long time. In that sense, they created the possibility for him.
I think that's absolutely right. One aspect of democratic sovereignty is that the people get to decide who the people are. And if they lose control over their ability to say, who's an American, then in a sense, they're no longer democratically sovereign. Control over your borders, I think, has to be a key aspect of, any democracy. The other thing that was going on at that time, not just the economists were saying this is going to be economically good for us, but you had this kind of multiculturalist ideology that attacked the idea of assimilation. Obviously, nobody today is going to say, well, everybody has to be like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, straight-laced, believer in, a certain particular religious doctrine. But, there is a kind of American culture that is pretty easily accessible. But if you don't actually have even that minimal amount in common, you're not going to have a society. And as the economists were trying to open up the gates to everybody, so I think, on the multicultural left, there was, an open attack on the idea that we wanted to assimilate anybody and that people ought to be allowed to keep their own customs and, stay in their own self-regarding communities over the course of, generations. And that's really the route to Bosnia or to Iraq or Syria. I mean, that's not really the basis of a successful democracy.
People like to live roughly in the same communities they grew up in. They kind of like stability to some extent.
Well, they like it, but in the second generation, I think that was kind of the key to the success of immigrant communities. They want to leave the family restaurant or the family neighborhood, and they want to get out. That was one of the reasons why I think actually teaching English was so important. My father was born in Los Angeles in 1921. His father had come over to escape being drafted into the Russo-Japanese War. And he just had no patience for bilingualism or multilingualism because he said, the single most important thing my public school education in LA did was I learned English and, speak it without an accent, and therefore you can get a job. So he goes on to get a PhD at the University of Chicago. So I do think that assimilation is a multi-generational process, but it really needs to take place at a certain level if, immigrant groups really are going to be successful as individuals.